Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, reacting to Charles Barkley's comments on the Bill Simmons podcast that the Timberwolves will regress. Then again, Charles also said most teams in the West would regress. So we'll talk about that. Plus, ESPN talks about a hole the Timberwolves need to fill along with other West contenders. We'll talk through that. And then also Rudy Gobert, more Gobert slander, this time from Shaq. And we got to react to that too. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you've had a fantastic week. Of course, the NFL season's underway. And of course, week 2 now of college football. So plenty going on in the sports world. And we're just a couple of weeks away from Timberwolves Media Day, training camp, and then preseason after that. So we're getting down to it here when it comes to the offseason. It's crazy when the team plays into June, how short the offseason can really seem. Lots to get to today. I want to talk Rudy once again because unfortunately, it's I wouldn't call it the gift that keeps on giving. It's the thing that won't go away is people just ripping on Rudy Gobert. So I want to talk a little bit more about that because there's always something new to react to there. Charles Barkley was on the Bill Simmons podcast and they talked about a lot of things. And the Timberwolves comments were actually much fewer than I expected, the Timberwolves discussion. So I want to react to that as well. And then also there's a bit of an ESPN piece that was about, or I should say, it was about holes in Western Conference contenders. So we'll run through that real quick too. So lots to get to still today. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right, let's start with Chuck. So Charles Barkley was on the Bill Simmons podcast. I believe this episode posted on Monday or Tuesday this week. And it was a wide-ranging conversation. Fun to listen to. I enjoy the Simmons podcast. I sometimes enjoy Charles Barkley, sometimes. And even that's true. And Inside the NBA, it was true on this podcast too, where there were moments that I was like, he doesn't, what's he saying? He doesn't really either truly know what he's saying or believe what he's saying. But then he also makes some really good points. And I think has some interesting analysis. And it's funny because when you're listening to Charles Barkley, at least when I listen to Charles Barkley, it doesn't feel like he's being overwhelmingly negative. It does sometimes in Inside the NBA, but listening to this hour and a half or whatever it was podcast, he didn't come across all that negative. But then when I was taking notes on it, I went back and I looked at it and I was like, you know what? He doesn't like anybody in terms of teams in the NBA this year. I don't mean like people, but there's some of that in there too, where he's skeptical of everything. And it's not the same type of get off my lawn that you get from Isaiah Thomas at NBA TV or some of the, younger vets or not vets, younger former players like a KG or a Paul Pierce or a Jeff Teague or guys that aren't in the league anymore, but played relatively recently. It's a different vibe, the way that Charles Barkley goes about it. And that's what came through in this interview. And they spent, 20 minutes or so kind of talking in and out of the Western Conference, more specifically, and the NBA as a whole, I guess, teams. And the only team that I came away from listening that I thought Charles Barkley liked this year was Oklahoma City. And maybe it's just as simple as, hey, that tracks with kind of the general consensus of NBA casuals and analysts alike that OKC had the best offseason. And by the way, I don't disagree. I've said that on the show. I actually think OKC has had a really good offseason, but I don't think that they're the only team that won't regress in the Western Conference. And I'm not exaggerating. Charles Barkley said Dallas would regress. He ripped on the Lakers for a while. And one of the reasons he said he was talking about Boston being really good is that and this is obvious, but of course they talked about Boston, and he said, Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and they've got 2 of the top 10 players in the league. And then Simmons was like, well, so do Lakers. And then, of course, Barkley had to kind of try and articulate why the Lakers weren't a championship threat, whereas the Celtics, obviously, I mean, they just won the championship. And of course, Barkley didn't really do that. It was more just like, we talk about the Lakers all the time on ESPN, and they always want to talk about the Lakers. So it devolved a bit into that conversation. So they didn't really get into the roster or actual basketball, which maybe shouldn't surprise us. But the point is, he didn't like anybody. Like he mentioned New Orleans as a team that if they can figure out the Zion Wait thing, and of course Simmons rightfully was like, well, I mean, we've been talking about that for 5 years. So that was essentially his analysis was, I like OKC, Dallas will regress. Oh, he said Denver will regress. He did say he liked what Denver did getting Westbrook, but that he didn't really like. It was still a negative conversation about Denver. He's like, they got to figure out their bench. Minnesota wore them down with their bigs. He hates the Clippers, which obviously the Clippers aren't going to be as good this year. He ripped a little bit on Kevin Durant and the Suns, and he calls them my sons still. Barkley does. And then near the end, he got into the Kings in Memphis. He thinks will be a lot better than people think, but he doesn't. I don't even think they mentioned Utah. They briefly mentioned Portland being the worst team. They talked about the Spurs maybe being a year away. But I came away from it thinking the only team he really likes to win the West is OKC. And the only other teams he likes to be better than last year would be the Pelicans, who still won 49 games, by the way. And Zion was as healthy as he's been in a while. The Pelicans, he liked the Kings offseason getting DeRozan, which I think they may be a little better, but I think that's a bit of an overrated move. And of course, somebody like Barkley would laud that move. And Memphis, obviously getting healthier, getting Ja back, and drafting Zach Edey. Like, that was kind of it. He said, I think the Wolves will regress, and I think Dallas will regress. And Simmons was like, you think Minnesota will regress? And he didn't really have much of a reason for that. Oh, what did he say? I put down his exact quote. He said, they got lucky. Everything worked out for them. And then he went into talking about how they wore Denver down because Denver didn't have depth. So he just said Minnesota made the conference finals. This is what he said, like not the exact quote, but he said, let me rewind. The exact quote was, they got lucky. Everything worked out for them. And then he proceeded, now I'm paraphrasing, to talk about Denver, their depth getting worn down, their lack of depth being exposed, Jokic being worn down by the Timberwolves bigs. So he's crediting that for the Wolves getting to the conference finals, not the Wolves being the Wolves. And then later in the conversation, he talks, when he was complaining about the media, he was talking about how everybody hated Luka, thought Ant was Michael Jordan, and then the Mavs beat the Wolves, and then it became Luka's the greatest thing ever, and how it wasn't being covered correctly. And then Simmons thankfully jumped in and said, hey, there were a lot of things with Ant that made sense from a narrative standpoint. And of course, Simmons is pretty heavily invested in Ant stock and in the Ant MJ comparison stuff, because he did like a whole show on that around that time. But all that to say, I came away from this thinking, who does Barkley like? Does he even like, it's the whole, could he name more than 2 players on any of these teams? Probably not. But that's, I guess it's not besides the point. It's part of the point. So I thought that was a little bit annoying. He obviously really likes Boston, of course. But I was like, okay, he likes OKC. He likes Boston. He likes what the Sixers did, his Sixers. And he likes the Pelicans if Zion's in shape. But everything else was a negative conversation. There's nothing else positive about any other team in the league. I thought that was pretty illuminating on his take. So anyway, it is a pretty fun listen. They talk about some good stuff. So if you want to go over to the Bill Simmons podcast on and listen to Barkley, there just really isn't much Wolves talk. Like, Simmons brought them up because Barkley forgot about them. So if you want to stoke your Charles Barkley disdain because we haven't seen him on TV in a while, go for it. Because that's seriously though, it's a pretty good conversation and an entertaining listen, even if it's not where I would go for all my basketball analysis. And I don't mean that about Simmons. Simmons is fine, but I mean the Barkley takes. All right, let's get into some more Rudy stuff, which summer hot takes. Like, hey, it's first week of September. We're wrapping up the summer. And there's just more Rudy stuff this week. So we got to talk about it. I got to, I guess, defend Rudy Gobert. I got in a bit of a soapbox once again. So we'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. Of course, for your second listen, you can go enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about Rudy Gobert. And as much as let me start with this. If you're rolling your eyes and hate that I'm talking about this, I think it deserves attention because it's such a somehow dominant national narrative now that's so silly. And it's very obviously Wolves specific. And I think it's important that we are like, it's an important thing to talk about because it's so crazy. And now we've got people that really shouldn't be talking. Like, I don't know. I don't want to tell people what to say, but people like Shaq should be better than this, right? So Shaq came out this week. And of course, last week we covered the Dwight Howard comments. We covered Derek Lively's comments. A couple weeks ago, Chauncey Billups said something on a podcast. Like, it's been this steady stream of stuff post-Olympics. And I said this at the time. Of course, Rudy had the finger injury, but then there was some matchup stuff and Rudy didn't play that much. And, after the first couple of games in pool play, I guess, for France, if I remember correctly, and then obviously hardly played in like the medal round games or the semifinals and the finals or and I said at the time, like, hey, this is just going to stoke the fire of, hey, Rudy's not good, which is of course patently absurd. Like, anyway, so we talked about all that. Now, most recently, Shaquille O'Neal did a thing. He was talking to his son, I guess, on his son's podcast. And it was on the Complex podcast, Goat Talk. And for whatever reason, his son Miles asked him who is the worst NBA player of all time. Shaq said Rudy Gobert. And of course, Miles laughs because it's silly. Like, why? And then he says, well, I mean, I know why. And then he says, what about Ben Simmons? And then Shaq calls him a bum as well. And then Shaq goes on to say, like, rip Rudy's contract. And I'm paraphrasing, but he says, if you sign a contract for $250 million, show us you're worth that. Talks about how guys like Rudy have screwed the system over, paraphrasing, and that they actually can't play, is what he said. And that he doesn't respect them, which is like, I don't know. I don't know. What direction do I take to even take this in? Like, it's I get it. It's a podcast. It's Shaq. He's a personality. He's on TV for a reason. He's always been the way that he is. And I think Shaq at times has some really astute analysis. I do. I believe that on Inside the NBA. And at other times, it's just like, what are we doing? And this is one of those moments where he thought this was like, hey, this is a funny viral moment. And it did go viral. It has like millions of views on X, like that clip does. So, and then like, it just adds to the things he said, because he said before stuff about like how he's only averaging, I think around the time he signed the contract, the extension with Utah that Gobert did, O'Neal said something about like, he could go out there and get a double-double or 12 and 8 or something right now. And it's of course not that simple. And I think that's actually more illuminating than anything Shaq said most recently, is because if we're evaluating, and apparently Shaq is, if we're evaluating dudes based on their point and rebounds per game, if that's how we're evaluating guys and deciding how much they should get paid, there's a whole list of Hall of Famers then of guys who average 10 and 10 or 12 and 8 or whatever you want to call it. Like, let's call them Hall of Famers if that's what we're doing. I mean, like, Dikembe Mutombo for his career averaged 10 and 10. And he's one of the very best defensive players of all time, 4-time defensive player of the year as well. Okay. So and obviously, and like I know Dikembe played a long time after he played into his 40s and was averaging like a couple points a game by the end. But even at his peak, he was averaging like 13 and 11, 13 and 12, which is, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I'd pull up Rudy. What he was averaging a few years ago in Utah was greater than that. I mean, he averaged what, 15 and 14, 16 and 13, 16 and 15 his last year in Utah, 14 and 13 this year. Like if that's what we're doing here, like Rudy's numbers are better than Dikembe's if we want to talk per game rebounds and points. And that's not what I'm doing. I'm not saying Rudy Gobert is a better player than Dikembe Mutombo. I don't want any of the old heads, coming after me for that. And yeah, Dikembe averaged more blocks per game. I get it. But that's my point, is that's not the game we're playing here. It's not, oh, Rudy, he only averaged 15 and 12, which is still really good. And this last year, what did I just say? It was 13 and 12 or something, 13 and 11. That's not how we evaluate players, and that's not how they get paid. It's what Rudy Gobert does, as I've said before, is he raises the overall floor of your defense every single year. Take out his rookie year, every year but one, Rudy Gobert has been on a top 10 defense. He has quarterbacked a top 10 defense. He's been in the league 11 years. So take out the rookie year. There was 1 year in Utah where his rookie year he only played 10 minutes a game, only played in half the game. So just take that out. So call it 10 seasons. 9 out of 10 seasons, this man has led a top-tier defense, a top third of the NBA defense. That is not a coincidence. He's won a block title. He's won 4 Defensive Players of the Year for a reason. He showed, like early in his career, he showed significant improvement from his first couple seasons when he was a bench defensive big to a legit all-star player. He was getting, he finished top 10 in MVP voting a few years ago. And I think he finished 11th another year. There's a reason why he gets these accolades, because the floor of his team is raised exponentially. And we saw that when he came to Minnesota. They went from a 15th ranked defense to a 10th ranked defense to the first ranked defense this season when he was healthy for a full year, and they had mostly a full complement of players for a full year. That, if we're so focused, and I think Chauncey Billups' comments a few weeks ago on a podcast, I'm sure, or a TV show or something, it was something about he has a hard time with the defensive player, which, by the way, Chauncey Billups is a current NBA coach, talking about having a problem with him winning Defensive Player of the Year when I think he even used the term gets cooked in the playoffs, which is just, or attacked or something like that, which is crazy. That didn't happen. As we've said on the show, yeah, Luka hits a game-sealing shot over Gobert. Show me a big that can guard Luka Doncic on the perimeter. That's not Rudy Gobert's fault. There's not a big in this league, short of maybe Bam Adebayo, and at this stage, probably Wemby, that can stay with a guy like Luka, an all-NBA player, an MVP caliber player on the perimeter, and allow them to hit a step-back three from 28, 29, 30 feet. That's not bad defense. It's not. The dude's 7'2". That's as good as any. And blame the coaching staff for putting him in that position. Blame Gobert for wanting to take on that challenge, whatever it is. But he's not backing down either. And the Jokic stuff in the playoffs, I mean, let's credit Karl-Anthony Towns. Let's not rip Rudy Gobert. Cat guarded Kevin Durant in round 1. Cat guarded Nikola Jokic in round 2. Rudy Gobert provided support in both rounds at the rim and shut down the paint in both rounds at the rim. The goal was never to have Rudy guard Jokic one-on-one. He did guard him a handful of times, and no, it didn't go great. But show me who can actually guard Jokic. Yeah, Karl-Anthony Towns was able to do a pretty good job. But if you want to look up the Joker's numbers, he was still pretty effective. They just ate into his efficiency a bit, and Denver didn't have, as Chuck established for us, didn't have the depth to do much about that. Jamal Murray had a miserable series, right? So Rudy was never the primary defender for Jokic or Luka Doncic. Nobody can guard those guys in those positions, period. So if you're expecting arguably the best defensive player of the year, the guy that won, arguably the best all-around defensive player, but certainly the Defensive Player of the Year award winner for a reason, to do that, who can? There's nobody that's doing that with regularity. So one play cherry-picked at the end of an important playoff game, Luka in isolation hitting a step-back three over Rudy, does not prove anything about Rudy Gobert. Nikola Jokic in limited possessions scoring against Rudy Gobert. I mean, Jokic is the best offensive player of this generation. He's a phenomenal offensive player, a phenomenal post player, offensive post player. I don't know. Like, what more do you want him to do? It's just such a silly thing, and nobody's saying he's like the best defensive player by like a massive delta, but he won his first defensive player of the year in 2017-18. We're 6 years removed from that. The dude's won 4 out of I guess technically 4 out of 7 awards over the last 6 years. 7 seasons, 6 years, right? So, like, think about all the other guys who I bet actually, let's see if I can do this quickly. I'm going to see if I can pull up other guys who got votes that year. Yeah, here we go. Defensive player of the year. The first year Rudy Gobert won it. Embiid was second. Anthony Davis was third. Paul George was fourth. Al Horford was fifth. Draymond Green was sixth in voting. Drew Holiday was the other guy that got a vote. So, yeah, Holiday, Draymond, well, not as much Draymond. Holiday still in that conversation. Anthony Davis. Nobody was voting for Joel Embiid for Defensive Player of the Year this year. The next year, he won Defensive Player of the Year, 2018-19. That was, by the way, Luka's rookie year. Giannis got second. Paul George got third. Nobody's voting for Paul George is still a good defender. Nobody's voting for him to win Defensive Player of the Year anymore. Joel Embiid got a first-place vote that year, finished fourth in voting. Miles Turner finished fifth. Those dudes are not in the conversation to win Defensive Player of the Year anymore. There's a reason Rudy Gobert is still in that conversation. The next year he won it, which is the 2020-21 season, so the second COVID-shortened year. Rudy won it easily. Second place was Ben Simmons. Third place, Draymond. Bam Adebayo was the only other player to get a first-place vote. Giannis was fifth. Clint Capella was sixth that year. Joel Embiid was seventh. Rudy's not only the one who's won it 4 times, he's the only one that's in the conversation every year for a reason. His impact matters on the game. And I get Shaq's point relative to value, relative to contract. If you're only looking at counting stats, which is not the best way to evaluate basketball players, and anybody who understands how to analyze basketball knows that. And it's funny because the part of the other argument from the old guard is don't just look at the numbers, right? Don't just look at the metrics, the advanced metrics, but they do want to look at the numbers. They just want to look at the ones that don't actually tell the right story. They want to look at the ones that are not telling of a true impact on the floor. I mean, like Ricky Davis averaged 20 points a game a couple of times, right? Like, should that dude have gotten $200 million? Like, it's just a nonsensical argument, and it can be picked apart so easily. And you know, shame on Shaq. I should say, by the way, Rudy did respond on X, which I actually don't mind this. Normally, it's like, just let it happen. But Rudy's just getting beat up so much. He says, Rudy's tweet was, quote, "It is sad to see someone that has accomplished as much as you did, Shaq," he tags Shaq, "both in sport and business, still be triggered by another man's finances and accomplishments. I get the entertainment part, but unlike other folks, you don't need that stuff to stay relevant." That is hitting the nail on the head from Rudy. Shaq doesn't need to do that stuff. People still pay attention to him. He's still rich. He's not, some of the other people who have said stuff. He's not like, I don't know. Well, Derek Lively, I guess, who's he's young. He's second year in the league. But some of these other guys who have said stuff, Dwight Howard isn't relevant right now. Maybe he's saying stuff like that to be relevant, right? Rudy's absolutely right. Kudos to Rudy for saying what he said. All right, let's close with ESPN talked about holes on Western Conference teams, Western Conference contenders. We'll talk about that here next. We'll close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something you would love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or is that something you lost in childhood? I know with me, schedule gets so busy, I haven't picked up something new like in a long time. I mean, I don't even do things that I like, relaxing hobbies that I enjoy as much as I should. Like, I play the guitar. During COVID, I played a lot more guitar. I picked it up like twice in the last 3 years, like since COVID, was over. Not over, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's hard to carve that time out. And kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose curiosity. We lose, the ability to carve out time for ourselves. Think about things you'd like to learn. Maybe it's just like you want to learn a new language, or you want to learn how to beat your friends in bowling or whatever. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era, I mean, that's the era we're in, right? Can come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, consider giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right. Let's close with this ESPN article. This is an ESPN insider piece by Tim Bontemps over at ESPN, of course. And the article is titled "One Roster Hole the Lakers, Nuggets, and Other West Teams Must Fix." So it's, of course, Lakers, Nuggets, also Wolves, Pelicans, and Kings, which is interesting. They skipped over, no Mavericks. Apparently they have no roster holes. And no, who else did they skip over? That was like a top 5 or 6 team. I mean, no Phoenix. Like, it's kind of cherry picked here. I guess maybe 5 of the teams with a glaring weakness. So with Denver, it's 3-point shooting. So they talk about losing Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in free agency. They, of course, add Russell Westbrook, who is like the worst 3-point shooter in NBA history if you look at volume. And then like Lakers, two-way wing play, which is a pretty significant hole to fill. Like, it's great that they have LeBron and AD, but not having a two-way wing play is a pretty important thing in today's NBA. I just I don't know. Which actually goes to Charles Barkley's point that I mentioned in the first segment. Like, this roster has some holes when it comes to the Lakers. The Pelicans, big man to help Zion. There's a reason why, like, we've seen a few, not real smoke behind this, but there's been conversation in the media, as there always is, about Karl-Anthony Towns and Brandon Ingram and a potential match there. But it's not like the Wolves and Pelicans are likely to commit an in-conference trade between two contenders, or I'd say two contenders. And then the Kings solving spacing, which is just another way of saying they need more 3-point shooting. Obviously, having, I mean, that's really all that is. For the Wolves, it's maybe not surprising. The roster hole that Bontemps points out is a boost in the backcourt. Talks about how the offense was he calls them 17th in offense. I think that's where Cleaning the Glass had them. They might have had him 16th. I think Basketball Reference had him 17th. And he says, I'll read directly here from the piece. He says, Conley's approaching his 37th birthday. Rudy Gobert and starting forward Jaden McDaniels are defense first options. As impactful as Naz Reid was as a third big coming off the bench, who provided offensive punch, a role that earned him 6th Man of the Year honors, Minnesota could have benefited from another option at guard. Rookie guard Rob Dillingham could become exactly that player, which is why the team's surprise move up the board to select him at number 8 was one of the offseason's most fascinating maneuvers. Goes on to talk about averaging 15 and 4 plus 44% from 3. At Kentucky, of course, just one season and almost entirely off the bench. He says, draws comparisons to 3-time 6th Man of the Year Lou Williams. Prime version of Williams could provide the offensive pressure release valve that Minnesota needs. That said, Dillingham is listed at 6'1", 176, and doesn't turn 20 years old until January. One of the oldest truisms in the NBA is the best way to lose games is to play young guards. For a team with championship aspirations, it's a tall order to ask someone like Dillingham to immediately step in and play significant minutes. He goes on to talk about Nick Alexander-Walker needing to step up as well, more shots, more chances with the ball in his hands overall, losing Slow-Mo, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin to free agency. And then he talks about the Dillingham move being creative because the Wolves are a second apron team. And for better or for worse, the roster is likely the one they'll carry into the postseason, which he's 100% right. Short of a surprising trade for, call it Cat or Nas, would be like the two guys that would be a true surprise to be traded, but could be and have value, obviously. If things go sideways, it's possible one of those guys is traded by the deadline. But if things go to plan and they're, in the top half of the Western Conference, or I should say top 4 of the Western Conference at the deadline, they're not making any moves short of filling that 15th roster spot like last year with the 2-for-1 Monte Morris trade, the eventual signing of TJ Warren and everything to fill the roster, and Luka Garza to a standard contract. There's not going to be significant moves. So the Lou Williams comp I'd brought up, I believe, around draft time, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think there's some things I think there's a lot of similarities there. I don't want to go too deep into that now. But Tim Conley, we talked about his comments. I can't remember if it was earlier this week or last week. He said, hey, we're going to count on these young guys, meaning Dillingham and TJ Shannon, but they also need to prove it, or they'll be learning from the bench. They'll be watching if they don't, if the mistakes they're making are not simply rookie mistakes, but they're not listening, or they're not executing the game plan as planned, or not playing hard defensively. Actually, missing defensive assignments was the actual assignment the actual example that Tim Conley gave. If they're missing defensive assignments, they're going to learn from the bench. And so there's options. They could just say, and I'm sure this will happen at some point this year, where Chris Finch is like, nope, I'm not going with the rookie. I'm going to have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, for better or for worse. He and Joe Ingles are running the show with the second unit. There's going to be those moments this year, but to get where they want to go, they can win some regular season games, and they could beat certain teams with a 19-year-old backup point guard. They could also beat certain teams with Joe Ingles running the offense off the bench. But to get where they want to go in spring, that 19-year-old point guard has to mature very quickly into an effective piece off the bench, and they can't be relying on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Joe Ingles, etc., to run the bench when they get to March and April, and they're worried about playoff seeding. So I think that it's absolutely the hole they tried to fill this offseason. The question is, did they fill it with Rob Dillingham? And if they didn't, there aren't any other long-term options. Daisha Nix is not a long-term option. Joe Ingles is not a long-term option in that role. And neither is Nickeil Alexander-Walker either. So, yeah, there's a lot of eggs in the Rob Dillingham basket, both this year and in the future, because he is the point guard of the future. Conley could retire after this year. At most, he's got 2 more years, and he'll be almost 39 by the end of next season, but in 26. So Rob Dillingham is what they need this year, and the hope is that he's what they need moving forward as a starting point guard as well. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. Of course, we'll be back on Monday next week, 3 shows, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The following week, we'll be back to daily, Monday through Friday. We'll work through some season preview stuff as we gear up for training camp, which is just around the corner. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And, of course, you can follow an X at Locked On T-Wolves, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen. Now go check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to your Locked On NBA. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description of this show, so you don't need to go search for it. Of course, this show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.